the secret, most effective weapon to destroy Protestantism is to destroy the belief that the papacy is the Antichrist. And they did that by propounding the false notion that the Antichrist of the Bible is only one individual that arises on the world scene just 7 years or 3.5 years, depending upon your interpretation, before Christ returns. That belief alone totally exonerates the papacy. No one can correctly call the papacy the Antichrist if they believe in a single Antichrist just 7 years before Christ's return. And that had been preached in the United States in the Protestant churches for nearly 100 years at the time of this writing. And with Protestantism already capitulating, or let's say succumbing to the Jesuit poison called futurism, the Jesuits were fomenting a global crusade. And their target was the Russian Orthodox Church, which had gotten control of the Russian government, and Protestants in Europe, particularly Germany, and Jews, who had many of whom had sought refuge in Russia. Refuge from persecution, Roman Catholic persecution, the idea that the Roman Catholic Church replaces the Jews as the people of God. And they had fled to Russia. Many Jews lived in Russia. So the Jesuits, by the way, if you don't know this, many of you do, but Lenin and Trotsky and the three main leaders, the third one whose name escapes me at the moment for whatever reason, were Jesuit trained. They were installed into Russia to open the door for this persecution, to raise the agitation, and as just a cover for the crusade that they were going to run. And likewise, the crusade against the Protestants and the Jews of Europe. There were three who suffered during the First and Second World Wars. Orthodox Christians, that is the Eastern sect of the Roman Catholic Church, which broke off and found their center in Constantinople. That took place in 1054 AD, and the papacy has ever since tried to destroy them as heretics. They either come back to the Roman Catholic Church or and receive and accept the primacy of the popes, or they're going to be killed. That's Rome's strategy always. Either come home to mama or we're going to destroy you. And of course that was the case in the Balkan Wars. That was the case in World War I and World War II. The Eastern Orthodox sect of the Roman Catholic Church is target number one. Target number two are Protestants, also considered by the Roman Catholic Church and canon law to be heretics, just like the Eastern Orthodox, and Jews. Those are the targets. They're religious wars. World War I and World War II were religious wars led by the Vatican against the heretics, the Orthodox, the Protestants, and the Jews. And there's an overall strategy behind the First and Second World Wars, and that is to raise the necessity for the creation of a modern nation state of Israel so that the Jews persecuted in the whole world will have a homeland to call their own, so that the papacy can fulfill its false futurist lie. See, Rome has every intention of bringing forth an Antichrist figure to deceive the whole world, thus leaving the way open for the Pope to rule the world. There has to be an Antichrist. Well, they borrowed from Daniel chapter 9, verse 23 through 27, and took that passage away from Christ and put it on Antichrist. Okay? It was Jesus who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease 2,000 years ago in the midst of the week, the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy. But they've reinterpreted it. See, it's the very heart of the Jesuit poison that has been so eagerly consumed here in the Protestant USA. They say that the he spoken of in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 is not Jesus, but the Antichrist. The Antichrist will cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. Well, if the Antichrist is a single individual, he comes just 7 years before Christ returns, and he causes the sacrifices and oblations to cease, like Jesus truly did 2,000 years ago, well, then there must be a modern nation state of Israel, and there must be Jews living in the land, and there must be a temple for animal sacrifices to be resumed. And in the midst of the week, the Antichrist will cause sacrifices and oblations to cease. Now, we Protestants know, that the papacy is the Antichrist. Always will be, always has been. That's his prophetic role in the world. But the papacy has deceived the world to believe that he's a man of God. So the papacy, all he's got to do is put forward a false Antichrist who will make a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews, allow them to build a temple, allow them to begin animal sacrifices, and then just simply 3.5 years later cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. And at that point, anyone who calls himself a Christian in this world will absolutely, undeniably, irreformably believe that that man is the Antichrist, whoever it is. Could be Mickey Mouse for all that matters. So some people say it's going to be Barack Obama. I don't care who it is. If he causes the sacrifices and oblations to cease in Israel after 3.5 years, you won't be able to convince anybody that that's not the Antichrist. The Jesuits have so firmly attached that lie into the hearts and the souls and the minds of Christians that they simply won't believe that the papacy is the Antichrist. There's your man. He signed a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews. He caused sacrifices and oblations to cease after 3.5 years. There's your Antichrist. Don't tell me anymore that the Pope is the Antichrist. And of course, all the time, the papacy is just laughing his diabolical fanny off in his great white throne in the Vatican. But back to the story. Listen, you can't fulfill that phony futurist interpretation, that Jesuit fulfillment of Daniel's 70th week, which Jesus perfectly and completely fulfilled 2,000 years ago. You can't foist upon the world that great deception called futurism unless there's a modern nation state of Israel. So there has to be a need, doesn't there? How could you foment a need for a modern nation state of Israel? Why, relentlessly persecute Jews no matter where they are in the world, until the whole world finally has some sympathy for the Jews. There's your modern nation state of Israel. We've got an answer. Persecuted Jews all over the world, the great Holocaust, 6 million Jews died in the gas chambers. This is just beyond. The world cannot tolerate this kind of injustice. We need a homeland for the Jews. 1948, you got your homeland. The persecution of First World War and the Second World War was enough to drive the Jews, despite their refusal to go to Israel. Remember, you have to know something about history that's never talked about. Never talked about. Because if you talk about it, it blows the lie right out of the water. Most of the Jews, the most influential of the Jews, during their time of persecution in Europe and Russia and elsewhere, was that we will not go back to our ancient homeland unless God delivers us with the same mighty right hand that he delivered us out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. In other words, they knew they were cast out of the land, and only God was going to bring them back to the land, and they were not going to go unless it was God who brought them back to the land. And they were not going to go back as a result of political eventualities. They wanted to see the strong arm of their deliverer. Okay? So, at least a controlling number of the Jews were not in favor of going back to Israel. If they go back without God's sanction, they will be grotesquely punished. And that voice had to be silenced, because Rome had to foment that futurist interpretation of Daniel's prophecy. There had to be a modern nation state of Israel. There had to be Jews living in the land. There had to be a rebuilt temple. There had to be a 7-year peace treaty. There had to be animal sacrifices again. And these Jews who say, we will not go back to Israel unless our God delivers us by a mighty right hand, just exactly like he delivered us out of Pharaoh's clutches, they had to be silenced. And that's what the Roman Catholic Church, through Russia and Germany and the First and Second World Wars, did. They assassinated and slaughtered those recalcitrant Jews who would never go back unless God delivered them. That's why that is how the world got the modern nation state of Israel, as a remedy for a man-made persecution against the Jews. That's how they got their modern nation state of Israel. Now, this author's going to write about this period of time, but he's going to give you the popular view, not the historical view, not the prophetic view. This man does not speak according to the law and the prophets, but according to politics and Roman Catholic canon law. For the truth, you need to go to the source of truth. Now, by continuing my setup for the reading of this chapter of the book, it's necessary for you